in a topic or a candidate, it actually shifts your underlying emotions and attitudes. By sharing our story, sharing our internal conflict, we're able to move beyond our partisan lens and connect with people in a really deep and lasting way. Oh, I keep going the wrong way. Sorry, y'all. Okay. The sole purpose, though, of deep canvassing is to shift underlying emotions and beliefs. It is a persuasion tool. It changes how people behave in lasting ways. Let's see if I can go the right way this time. Yes, I did it. Okay, good. That's one hurdle. Um, when we talk about deep canvassing, there is a specific script structure. Yeah, okay. There is a specific script structure to deep canvassing. Um, this is going too fast. In traditional canvassing, there isn't, right? Traditional canvassing, we, knock on a door. We're asking for an ID on a candidate or an issue. I remember back in 2008 when I started knocking doors for Obama. I went to the Democratic Party campaign office. They handed me a clipboard, a script, which was about 2 to 3 sentences, and a bunch of literature. And they said, "Have at it. Go on out." And I was very skeptical. Are you going to train me? Can you help me get through this? But no, that was basically it. And when you knocked on the door, it went something like, "Hi, my name is Bonnie. I am here to find out who you plan on voting for. Do you plan on voting for Obama?" It was a yes, no, maybe. No, no in between. The script is very short, and I'm really there to just deliver a message. After I get through my one question, I hand them some literature and I say goodbye. That's it. That's what a traditional canvas looks like. It's transactional, it is not transformational. Whereas a deep canvas script has 5 parts. And we're going to delve into each part individually. But for an overview, the first section is a 1 to 10 scale. Second, we go through a story exchange. In the third section, we actually process conflict. Fourth, we make our case. And then we ask that 1 to 10 scale question again. Now, let's talk about each one of these individually. So, this 1 to 10 scale is very, very important. This is where we invite the person we're talking to rate themselves on a scale of 1 to 10. So, as an example, on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you feel about marriage equality? Person says, yeah, if I had asked a yes no question, yes or no, do you believe in marriage equality? That is very closed-ended question. But a scale gives you nuance, right? A person could say they're a 5. Well, then there's a little bit of cognitive dissonance there. They're not really sure, they're undecided. There's a place to go now with that. And you can ask, why is that the right number for you? Why are you not a 10 on the scale? Why are you not an 8 on the scale? This 1 to 10 scale actually gauges complexity. It allows you to ask follow-up questions where a yes no question would not allow. And then you could help unpack those concerns. But at that point, we put those concerns on a shelf to come back to later. We want to hold that. Right now, we're just trying to gauge where you are, how you feel about a particular topic, a particular candidate, a particular issue. The next section is our story exchange. Now, this is probably the heart of your deep canvas conversation. This is where you're going to spend the bulk of your time. This is where we ask voters to share their relevant emotional experiences on a particular topic, and we actually get to share ours. And not only do we share, but we paint a picture, right? We want to give them everything about that experience so that they're right in that experience with us. They're reliving it with us. This is where we practice that skill that we're going to delve into a little bit later, which is compassionate curiosity. And we're vulnerable. We're actually sharing how we feel, how it felt to be in that experience. The focus here is on lived experiences. What we have found is that facts don't move people. In fact, if you start spouting facts at people, that entrenches them in their position. It actually alienates them and it can put them off. But when we share our experiences, the ones that we've lived, people can't argue with that. I can never argue with an experience that you shared with me because that's your experience. Just as you could not argue with an experience I share with you, right? That is my lived experience. That's how I process that. Our stories enable us to connect with the person that we're talking to, and it builds that trust. I've just shared very vulnerably with you an experience that I had that had a profound effect on me. That's building that trust. It's building that relationship. That's why we call it a relational tool. Before we move on, I want to share with you a video that really depicts a very good deep canvas conversation. Before I share it with you, I had said it at the beginning of this talk that I would come back to a little bit of the history of deep canvassing. And this is where I want to introduce that because this video follows up on that. So back in 2008 in California, um, they had marriage equality on the ballot. This wasn't the first time. Over the last 10 years, the previous 10 years, the organizers and volunteers that had pushed for marriage equality had suffered 28 defeats at the ballot box. 28. They had organized and rallied people and volunteers and spoke to hundreds of voters, and they lost 28 straight times. So after this last defeat in 2008, they got back together and they decided, you know what? We need to figure this thing out. Otherwise, we're going to keep losing. So they put together hundreds of volunteers and organizers. And in 2010, they went back out. And this time it was different. This time they went out to have a conversation with folks and not with just anybody. They went out to have a conversation with folks that voted against marriage equality and with folks that didn't vote at all for marriage equality. This conversation that you're about to see is a result of that, of all of that work they put into to talk to folks that were against them. And really, it was about listening and trying to pull out why. They were listening to understand. So what you're going to see in this video is Jackson. Jackson is an organizer. He uses the he, him pronouns. And Clint is the man on your right, my right. He's the voter. Jackson knocked on Clint's door. Now, this is a 2-minute, 30-second snapshot of a much longer video, but this illustrates a really powerful deep canvas conversation. And as you watch, I want you to just kind of think and reflect on why is this different? How is this deep canvas conversation different? What are my noticings? What is Jackson doing? And what effect is that having on Clint, the voter? Okay, here we go.
We're talking to folks about marriage for gay and lesbian couples. Do you remember that being on the ballot in 2000? Okay.
Prop 8.
Yeah. Do you remember how you voted on it?
We didn't vote.
You didn't vote. Okay. What would you say is on the side for you that's holding you back from supporting it? I'm just trying to understand better.
Basically, I kind of didn't want to get involved. I didn't want to make the wrong choice.
Yeah, sure. You want to do the right thing.
Now you're making me think about this. I happen to have a cousin who's lesbian that I love very much, and she's been with another woman for like about 20 years.
Oh, wow, that's a long time.
So I don't have any prejudice towards that.
What's your cousin's name?
Her name is Jill.
Jill. Okay, so it seems like Jill would be real happy, right, if she could get married.
They'd like to, especially if they're going through financial troubles.
Yeah, that's helpful.
And I believe that stuff. See, I get emotional.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. Well, it seems like it's really hard decision.
Well, when it comes to health issues and stuff.
What? Just curious. Why does it, make you feel so emotional?
Because right now they can't do things for each other.
Yeah. That's gotta be really hard. And I sorry how much you love and care for them. And for a lot of folks, it's about protecting this sort of idea of man, woman, and things like that. But for us, it's about protecting each other.
Yeah, you told me tonight when you were bringing that stuff up, and I realized that about my cousins. As much as I love them and stuff, I don't know that I take it in internally as much.
Yeah.
That's like you're saying about voting. Why didn't I? And now, because it wasn't something that was really super personal to me.
Sure. We're going to be voting on this again in the future. What do you think would be the right thing to do?
I would vote for gays to be able to legally get married.
And why does that feel right to you?
Because I think if two people love each other, they love each other, the ones who are couples. Yeah. And I respect that.
Okay. Thank you for listening. Let's see if we can get this back now. 1 second. Oh, we seem to have lost it. Okay, just a second. Give me a second, folks. I'll be right back. Okay, here we go. It's always hard to come back from a video. Every single time I find it hard to come back from a video, but here we go. Okay. There we go. Back. Thank you for indulging me. So, as you saw in that video, I got very emotional for Clint. And this is a rhetorical question because, why are voter stories so impactful? And the reason is people make decisions and they form opinions from a very emotional place. And that's their own stories. And I want to share a brief story with you. I have so many experiences, wonderful experiences, talking to folks out in the community and on various issues. But this particular time, Roe v. Wade had gotten overturned, and I wanted to talk to my dad about it. I grew up in a household that was always pro-choice. And so I called Dad and I asked him, why have you always been pro-choice? I never asked that question before, but I said, Dad, Roe v. Wade has been overturned, and I'm feeling kind of sick about it, and I want to know your thoughts. And he said, Bonnie, he said, I don't know what to think at this point. And I said, well, tell me why you've always been pro-choice. And this gets to this slide. He then began to explain to me and share a story and an experience with me that I had never heard before. He said that he was about 9 years old. He grew up in a family of 15, very poor, two-bedroom house, and outdoor plumbing. And he said that his sister, they had saved, and his oldest sister had gone off to college. She came back that first year, and she was pregnant. And my grandmother, wanted her to complete college. So they took her to a midwife who performed an abortion. And unfortunately, as a result of that, his sister passed away. She died. And that is tragic, but that experience for him was the turning point. He told me that after that, he never wanted anybody to go through that ever again. And nothing can sway him from that opinion because it's so very tied up to that emotional experience that he had. His story, his experience. People make decisions from their own experiences, their own stories. We are all made up of these stories that have shaped our worldview, right? So, compassionate curiosity is a critical skill when you are sharing your story. It has a long-term persuasive effect. What you're doing is you're asking questions without judgment, and you're asking open-ended questions. And as you saw in the video, Jackson asked Clint, well, why do you feel that way? He asked about the cousin's name, all bringing it more and more closer to Clint's personal experience, his personal relationships. He didn't realize he had a connection to that issue until he was questioned about it with these open-ended questions. Jackson was a great listener. He let him talk. And you could almost see the wheels turning as Clint came to his own decision. That's what compassionate curiosity is really about. And we have a tool that helps you get there. This tool is what's known as the cone of curiosity. That's what we call it in the deep canvassing world. And it's a very effective tool. When you are talking with someone and you hear the hint of a story, and it could be anything. You could be talking with someone and they could say, I was at the hospital last week. Well, there's a story there, right? Were you visiting or were you working? You were visiting. Who was it? A family member? You can go very deep, asking a lot of open-ended questions. It starts with, tell me more about that. And then it's, when did that happen? Where did that happen? Who was involved, or who were you with, or who did it impact? What happened? How did it happen? And then you want to go one step further. You want to ask, how did that feel? Because we can't assume we know how people feel. The way I feel in one situation might be completely different from the way somebody else feels. And then finally, we want to dig even deeper, and we want to get to the emotional core of that conflict by asking why. Why did it feel that way? In the video that I shared, you saw Jackson say, well, why, this seems very emotional for you. Why, what's coming up? Why do you feel that way? And it made Clint have to reflect on his feelings, right? That's deep canvassing. After we share our stories, we process conflict, right? We return to those fears and the conflict that folks named when we first asked them that 1 to 10 scale. We didn't visit it then, but this is the appropriate time. Now we have built up trust. We have shared vulnerably. We've listened compassionately. Now is the time to ask a little bit more about why they felt that way at the beginning. This is the time when we can directly tackle those fears. And again, we're still asking open-ended questions, right? We're getting at that cognitive dissonance. And then we make the case. And this is one of my favorite parts. This is the section of the script where you as an organizer get to tell why you are there, right? First of all, I'm going to reiterate the main reason why I'm out canvassing, the main reason why I knocked on your door or made this phone call. I'm going to put a fine point on that and tell them why. I'm going to give them a sense of urgency. This is important because, and I'm going to build on the common ground that we just built, that we just experienced. And I'm going to tell them my personal why. This gives me a chance to say, this is important to me and my family because. This also gives me a chance for me to shift the blame to where it belongs. It's not with us necessarily, it's somewhere else. So that's why I really, really like this section of the script. And then, whoops, did it again. And then, of course, we're going to come back to that 1 to 10 scale. We're going to invite them to rate themselves again. And this is where we get to check for movement. Not everybody moves, but many times in a powerful deep canvas conversation, when you've unearthed those stories, those experiences, when you've shared, people will move. You can persuade folks. And then we're going to reflect and process. This is where we might get some of those aha moments from somebody. I never really thought about it that way. But now I guess I'm here on the scale. All right? Gives you the takeaway, actually. And now that's the end of my presentation. And I'm ready for questions or comments.
Well, that was quite lovely. Even though I'll admit I have seen that video before, it's still kind of pretty hard hitting every time you say it. One never expects the emotion to change quite that much. You're expecting a normal conversation, like what is the guy going to say, but it really changes.
Yeah,
But yeah, so like while we allow like a minute for like people to like load up some questions, I thought I would ask you some as well, depending on like
sure.
the other thing. Okay, so first thing, since you mentioned Obama campaign, or that I'm presuming like that's like his first campaign, like way back in like 2008 types. It's been near like 15 years now. Has there been a lot of change in how? I mean, okay, other than okay, you mentioned the fact that the script then was very simple, but in deep canvassing itself, have things evolved in how they go?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't, and the initial deep canvas scripts didn't have that full structure that we have now with the 1 to
Okay.
10 scale and the story sharing and we didn't have that full structure that we have now. So it has evolved over time. We've realized that those experiences are what those sharing of those stories, sharing of those experiences are what are the key and the heart to deep canvassing. That's the way we help people process their conflict. Often people hold conflicting views, but their real view is a much more kinder view. The way they view themselves is kinder. And when they're able to talk through that, they're able to realize that they actually most of the time share the same values as you do. They've just been looking at it slightly differently. I've had a number of conversations over the years with folks that I never thought I had anything in common with. And come to find out, we do have a shared humanity. We have shared values. We all want to make sure that people are fed and housed, and we all believe this. We just kind of think about it, going about it differently. But if we can share those experiences and what that does for a community and a society, for everyone to have those things, we are able to come to some common ground.
Oh, I mean, at some point, we were discussing this before the session as well. Nowadays, it almost feels like there is no common ground.
Yeah.
But I suppose if you do deep canvassing, you kind of realize that that's perhaps more of a myth. There is more common ground than you realize. In your experience, are there any other myths that people seem to have about just having a conversation with somebody from the other side or an undecided voter, and like that can be dispelled? Like, what do you think are the common myths that people would be dissuaded of if they did deep canvassing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one huge myth that I have come across when I'm training folks is people think that when you talk to somebody, they're not going to answer your questions, that they're going to be standoffish, that
Okay.
they're going to think you're intrusive or nosy or rude. That is not the case. In my experience, people are anxious to talk about these types of things. I can't tell you how many times I have heard, you know what? I need a second because nobody's ever asked me that before. You hear that time and time again. People want to share what they're feeling, what they're experiencing, and they don't mind that you ask. They really don't. I think that's a misconception out there.
Oh, I mean, it must be a misconception because, like you said, people don't imagine they can talk. But another thing that you had mentioned was very critical was your ability to, let's say, have an opening anecdote or something that like gets the conversation going.
Mhm.
How would like somebody pick that anecdote? How do you know that this will work before you have sort of conversation? Like, what does that depend on?
That's a great question. It depends on building that rapport right
Okay.
right from the beginning, right? Being honest and open, your body language, your facial expression, you're smiling, you're happy to be at that door or on that phone, and it's how are you in a genuine way, like how are you doing today? And then
Okay.
getting to the point. Here I'm here to ask some questions about what you think. And I really am interested in what you have to say. Showing people that you are interested in what they have to say with genuine curiosity and no judgment usually pulls them in.
Ah, that is pretty nice as such. Also, another question is about the range. Now, you had mentioned that you would have like 1 to 10, for example, and in your presentation, you had said if there are five, then you can probably change minds. I was curious. This is a personal question of mine. I was curious. Now, if somebody says that there are three or a four,
Yeah.
where are you aiming for? Are you aiming to like pull them to like a six or a seven or something like that, or are you just hoping to bring them like midway to five? Like, where do you judge the idea that okay, this person's mind has actually changed?
Yeah. Good question. Um, yeah, 3, 4, 2 even. There's I think in our society, a lot of times we'll tend to brush off people that disagree with us, right? And that's a mistake. There's always an opportunity to plant a seed, to ask them some questions, and to understand their specific point of view. I want to know if you're a 2. Why is that? What are you thinking? Help me understand that. Because not only am I going to learn something, but I'm going to build a bridge by listening, right?
Hmm.
And if I can get through that conversation, I can plant a seed that maybe the next time they talk to somebody, they're a little bit more open. They're a little bit more, have more patience to listen to somebody else's point of view because I was there to listen to theirs.
Okay. point of view is quite interesting. I mean, if it changes minds, I suppose that is good. Another thing, and perhaps like it's a bit of playing devil's advocate here. At the end, so you have like the personal experience, right, in which you tell them, okay, here is my experience with this. Is that, are we depending on the volunteer to always have such a story on the spot, or do we cynically just make a script and say, hey, you know what, here is a personal story that's like really nice? Like, what do people do actually?
Yeah. Well, a couple of ways I want to answer that. um, First of all, we're all made up of stories, right? I have
Yeah,
I
of
have
course.
my own stories. I have my brother's stories. I have my mother's stories. I have my cousins, my neighbors' stories. I have I am a compilation of stories and experiences. So volunteers have these stories. It's getting them comfortable with talking about them.
Hmm.
That's the key. If I could share a story on mental illness, I could share a story on coming to terms with grief. I could share a story on all types of things, as you probably could as well. It's making that connection between that voter story and your story. And if you can
Hmm.
workshop that a little bit, that's what I typically do with our volunteers when I'm training. I workshop stories. And then I ask them to have a story bank. It's always good to kind of have little stories in your back pocket. What if we're
Hmm.
talking about this particular issue? How can you connect to that issue? I Once we were doing an immigration script, and a lot of our volunteers said, I don't have any immigration stories. And I said, that's
Hmm.
okay. Have you ever moved someplace from, maybe you moved from your hometown to a new town? What did that feel like? Was it slightly
Yeah.
isolating? How did you get to know people? How did you find your way around? It's not necessarily always the story, but it might be the emotion or feeling that's associated with that experience and story. Does that make sense?
I mean, yeah, it does. Especially the immigration thing, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, even
Yeah.
if I didn't change countries, I surely changed homes.
Right.
Um, yeah, on the same thing, here's a question by one of the listeners. They say that, I feel I tend to skip over the process conflict section and move on to making the case. Can you share some tips for not rushing the process when having these deep canvassing conversations?
Yeah. Yeah. The process conversation. And it is all going to depend on what came before, right? Um, it is a tricky section of the script. I will give you that, because people are always holding these opposing views. Typically, what I say in that section is, I heard you express this when we talked earlier, but you also said this. And though, I'm having trouble reconciling that. Can you help me understand? Because a lot of times they'll say one thing and then they'll say something that's completely contradictory. And you can call attention to that by just saying, I heard you mention this. You are all for this, but you also said this. And I'm trying to put those two together. Can you help me understand? Because I really want to know. That's
Hmm.
that's one of the best ways to resolve that conflict, to get to the heart of that. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, I mean, conflict resolution, actually, there's plenty of questions on conflict resolution, which people seem to struggle with. Like, for example, one of the questions is, how do we know when, like, the conversation's over? Like, we want to have some conflict resolution and we want the conversation to hopefully go somewhere. But sometimes, perhaps, we are like, you know, I don't know, flogging a dead horse or something. Like, the conversation is not going to go anywhere. What are the signs that give up and just go to the next person?
Yeah, that's great. You know, I hate to say that you'll intuitively know, but you'll know. You know what I mean? You know
It's a
when
vibe.
people are giving you one word answers. You know
Hmm.
when they're really not engaged in a conversation. We know that inherently. And that is the time. Maybe you just go straight to make the case. Well, thank you so much for listening to me today. My whole purpose for being out here was this, and I really
Hmm.
appreciate your time. I do have one more question for you. You want to do that last scale question anyway. And then
Ah,
wrap it up. But you intuitively know if someone is genuinely interested in what you have to say. So I'd
Oh,
say that it's more more common sense than anything, because we know if somebody is not engaged with us, we know right away.
okay. I mean, coming to the point of like ending the conversation, I suppose at the end of all of this, how are we measuring like the success of deep canvassing campaigns? Like there are traditional metrics like voter turnout or something, but are those the only ways we measure it, or is there some other way?
Yeah, yeah. I had a friend once say that we typically we measure deep canvas, we measure our canvassing in general with these empty calories, like number of doors knocked, number of people talked to. Those are empty calories when it comes to deep canvassing. In a deep canvas conversation, we want to know if we've moved people. We want to
Okay.
know if from the first scale question to the second rating, have we moved this individual? We want to know whether did that person share a story with us? Were we able to pull a story out of them? I use that a lot in my coaching. If you can't get a story out, that's an opportunity for me and you to workshop and to coach. Did I share a story? Was I vulnerable? Those are the types of things we measure. The persuasion rate, the
Hmm.
movement rate, whether they shared a story, whether the canvasser shared a story, and how the conversation
Hmm.
ended up feeling at the end. It's in sentiment.
Okay.
You know, did you feel like whether the person moved on the scale or not, did you feel like you planted a seed that there was some movement in that conversation?
Okay. So you're measuring it from a very human scale. Like, you have to make the judgment, like whether this matters. Speaking of human, this thing, that's one of those things. Like, is there a lot of resistance? Like, is resistance to having a conversation a true challenge, or like we are not going to face as much resistance as we think we are?
No. Um, yeah, I think it can be more of a challenge post COVID, right?
Hmm.
We got shut in and shut out and we locked down and we stopped talking to people for a time. So it's more of a challenge since COVID, but I still, I'm an optimist. I believe people want to talk with us. They want to have that human connection. We're missing
Hmm.
that in society nowadays. And we want to reach out and we want to share what we think. A lot of people, it's that myth that people don't want to talk. They do want to talk to us. I can tell you
Hmm.
too that, and this is an aside, but I've been knocking on doors for the last month now and filming. And
Oh,
people
okay.
always say to me, nobody wants to be on film, do they? I rarely does anybody say no. Do you mind if I film this? They're even willing to be on camera and talk to you and have a 15, 20-minute conversation. People want to talk. They want to express their opinions.
Ah, I mean, it's nice that you mentioned your own effort, because this is the last question, and I wanted, it's like a personal question of mine. I wanted you to share, like, was there ever a campaign or like perhaps a session of like deep canvassing when you truly felt like you made a big difference? Like that was like, you are like, you know what? This is my inspiration. I know I made a difference now.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a conversation that comes to mind. It was over the phone, and over the phone, I don't know that I present as a particular race. I will say it that
Okay.
way. I'm a
Hmm.
New Yorker at heart. Sometimes my New York accent comes out, but I've moved all over the country. I don't have a discernible dialect, accent, what have you. I was talking to a gentleman who self-identified as Hispanic, and he told me that he felt that blacks were lazy, and the blacks in his community, all they wanted to do was collect social welfare, and they just, it was stereotypical of what you hear.
Hmm.
Everything that you hear negative about African Americans, he was talking. He was just going on. And so I let him, I listened, I didn't judge. And then I said, when he was done, I said, that's not my experience. I said, and I'm
Okay.
African American. And it was an audible, and I said, and I've been working since I was 15. So have my sisters. We work hard. I think that sometimes when people fall on hard times, they need help. And that's what it's there for. I also believe that some of what I hear you say is some of the rhetoric that I hear on one side. Something that people want you to think so that we can't come together. We're pitted against each other and we can't come together to fight for what we need. Right? That's
Hmm.
what I think that is coming from. And I asked, don't you know somebody that's Black that has worked hard? Well, yeah, yeah. Bottom line, end of the conversation, he said, I was wrong. I don't even know
Ah,
if I said that. I said I don't really believe that. And I do believe that sometimes people need the help and that, you know, everybody avails of themselves of the help, regardless of color, regardless of race. Sometimes. And that Blacks
oh,
aren't, he didn't believe it at the end of and it was just so heartwarming to know that he had changed in the space of that one conversation. He had changed. So yeah,
oh, that is exceptional. I wouldn't have thought that he would have changed so quickly.
he did.
But I think what you said was interesting in the sense that the difference between like a person, like when you meet somebody in person for deep canvassing versus on the phone, is there a significant difference between the two? I mean, because a lot of campaigns would pick phone banking perhaps because they might be faster or something like that. Is there a big difference?
No, effective rates are exactly the same. The persuasion rates are exactly the same. All of that is the same. The only difference I would say is maybe a personal difference, like the difference I just explained to you, where
Hmm.
people don't know my ethnicity and may say things that are out there because they feel like they can.
Hmm.
Um, but when you call them on it, they really, that rhetoric is just rhetoric. They don't
Ah,
necessarily believe that. So that is one difference I see between phone banking and knocking on a door. Because obviously, when I knock on a door, you see me, you know me.
hmm.
Um, Other than that, no, I don't see any difference between door knocking and phone banking. We do
So, like,
quite a bit of phone banking, in fact.
I mean, that is interesting. Even on a technical side, like you have similar scripts for both phone banking and real life.
Exactly the same script.
Oh,
Exactly the
nice.
same. Yeah. Yeah. We go through the same steps.
Hmm. Okay, I think it's time for us to wrap this part out. But thank you, Bonnie, so much. This was a very, very enlightening time. I mean, sound like I really felt the fact that, like you said, I had a lot of myths about deep canvassing, and I felt a lot of them did change in this conversation as well. So that was really lovely. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
To,
I
yeah,
appreciate
and
it.
no, no worries. The pleasure is all of us. And to all of our attendees, yeah, this will be this is recorded, so you will receive a copy of it. So thank you so much for attending, and keep an eye out for another call webinar. So I'll see you guys soon. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.